grab a seat. Turn with me to John chapter 4. As we continue working through this gospel in this Christmas season. Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and just assume that this is the first time you've ever heard a sermon that started with a quote from Stephen King, a novelist known by his horror books. And here we are. I was listening to a Stephen King book not long ago, and there's part of the story that really caught my attention. And as it did, it was a group of main characters who were kind of this quartet of people, these group of four people that were going on this journey, this quest to save the world. And so it was kind of this Narnia-like, or not Narnia, but Lord of the Rings-like journey where they're going on this grand journey to save the world. As they did, they came to this small community of people, mostly elderly people that were very needy and had a lot of issues in their community. And this group thought, man, we can make a big difference here. And they contributed and helped and did some good things to help these people. And they were incredibly kind. And in some ways, they wanted to stay there, but they knew we've got a bigger mission that we were about, that we need to move on down the road and we need to go to this new place. And so as they were struggling with this decision to leave this little community that had these great needs, the youngest in their quartet was, or their quartet was this 12-year-old little boy named Jake. And he just said, it doesn't feel right to leave these people with all their needs still here and go on a journey. And Roland, who was kind of the Gandalf-like creature in this story, says this in response to Jake's comment that it doesn't seem right to leave. He says, making things right is what all of this is about. But if you look too long at the small rights, the ones that lie close at hand, it's easy to lose sight of the big ones that stand farther off. And I love the way he captured that and described this kind of need of, man, we've got these things that you want to make right in front of you that are right, feel very immediate, and they're right in your immediate needs that you can see, and they're almost tangible, and you can feel them. But it's easy to focus on those and forget that there's actually even bigger needs that are further down the road that need to get solved. And he's saying it was good to help with these needs of these people, but saving the world was good too. Do you kind of catch the logic of the argument he's making? He's saying, if we solve their little needs down here in their community right here and right now, that's going to be wonderful. But if the world ends, it's not going to help a whole lot. Like, we actually need to do something else. But if we save the world, then it's actually going to bless this community as well. And it's a matter of perspective. Sometimes, can you relate? Like, sometimes you can see the problems that are right in front of you, but you lose the big picture. You lose the scene of all the things that need to get righted in the world. And you lose the idea of what God is doing and the way in which he's working things out. And you begin to think about the problems that are right in front of you. And you think, I've got this problem in my life with my health or my relationships. Or I've got this problem with my finances, or this family squabble that I've got to deal with, or this life transition I'm going through. And you begin to see this thing that's just right in front of you. It seems so big right in front of your eyes that you can't see anything beyond it. It just kind of takes over everything. And I think that is the point of what King was saying when he says we lose sight of the important things that stand farther off. I think it's also what we see here in the book of John, in John chapter 4. And so as we see this, we're going to see that Jesus is approached by this royal official, and he's a father who loves his son, and his son is sick to the point of death. And so there's this giant thing that's right in front of him that he feels ever present as this kind of tangible need in front of himself. And Jesus is going to push and say, yes, I see that, but there's also more that I want you to see in your life. And so as he's panicking and desperate, and rightly so, because his son is dying, he's begging Jesus to do something, to intervene, to heal his son. And Jesus is going to engage this man in kind of a surprising way. He's going to speak to him in a way that challenges him and almost kind of pushes against him in some ways, not at all in the ways we typically think of Jesus. But here's what Jesus is doing in the midst of this scenario. He actually loves this royal official too much to say, let me fix this, but not fix the rest of the stuff in your life. He actually loves us too much to say, to fulfill all of our requests and give us everything we want in the right here and right now, because he wants us to have a stronger faith, a more dependable faith, a more sustaining faith that will actually carry us not just through the one event that's right in front of us, but will carry us through the rest of all our lives and even into all eternity. And so he wants to deepen our faith. So this is where we're going to go. So our question for you today is, how do you progress in your faith? Like, how do you grow faith? How do you mature and move towards maturity in terms of your own faith? And the thing is, we head into this that I want you to know is there's something in this text for every one of us. Like, you may be here today and you think, man, I don't really feel like I have any faith. Or maybe you think, oh, I've got faith that's like a dimmer switch that's been turned down all the way, and it's like got a tiny flicker, but that's about all I can find right now. And you need a bigger faith. Or maybe you're one that's facing a real trial right now, and there's something that when I say that thing that's right in front of you, you go, I know exactly what that is in my life. And you need a bigger faith, a more mature faith to help carry you through the thing that's right in front of you right now. Or maybe you're someone who, God's weathered you through some storms, and you've got some strength, and you've got some confidence about God's ability to show up, but you need him to show up again. And you need to know that he's trustworthy, and that you can count on him to carry you through life. And maybe in this Christmas season, you're just facing a particular struggle. And can I just encourage you, if that's where you are, to lean in and just to ask the Lord to speak to you through his word today as we jump into this. So let's jump in and read John chapter 4, and I'm going to begin in verse 45. So when Jesus came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him, having seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the feast, for they too had gone to the feast. And he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water into wine. And at Capernaum, there was an official whose son was ill. And when this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and to heal his son, for his son was at the point of death. And Jesus said to him, unless you see signs and wonders, you won't believe. And the official said to him, Sir, come down before my little child dies. And Jesus said to him, Go, your son will live. And the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. And as he was going down, his servants came up to meet him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked him the hour which he began to get better, and they said to him, Yesterday, at the 7th hour, the fever left him. And the father knew that was the exact hour when Jesus had said to him, Your son will live. And he himself believed, and all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. So as we look at this word of the Lord to us in this scene, you catch the tension in this passage, don't you? This desperate father who has a son who's at the point of death, and he comes to Jesus and gets a very unexpected response. But John sets the scene and kind of sets the stage for us back in verses 45 and 46. He said when Jesus comes to Galilee, remember Jesus had been in Samaria. He'd been meeting with this woman at the well. He spent a couple days there with this village telling them about Jesus. It says that many came to believe and they trusted Christ because of the testimony of this woman. And now he's left Samaria. He's gone back to his people, and they wonder if he's going to show up for them. In fact, they're pretty sure he will. Like, man, he's one of us. He's coming back to his homeland. He's come back to his people. And he did miracles when he was here before. I bet he shows up and does some more cool stuff. And so they're expecting him to do kind of signs and wonders and all kinds of good stuff. And he comes back into, John says, Cana from Galilee. Well, do you remember the first miracle that we saw Jesus perform was what? He was at a wedding, and there at that wedding, he turned water into wine. And it was a big deal because in that culture, to be able to provide wine for a community, when you had a wedding, you invited the whole city or the whole village in to participate. And your ability to provide for that scene was a statement about your ability to provide for a wife. And so if your son was on the hook for this wedding and you were unable to provide, it was saying something about your inability to care for this gal. So it was something that felt like a very intense thing in that culture for their ability to provide. And when they couldn't provide wine and they ran out, they were in crisis. And this physical symptom that bubbled up ultimately led to a spiritual reality of Jesus being a new creation into that world and turned that water into wine. And so it's in that same place in Cana in Galilee where that happened. And now Jesus is back, and they're thinking, man, maybe Jesus is going to do some more cool stuff, and we can sit back and watch this. They're kind of treating Jesus like the fun friend at a frat party that has really good party tricks. And they're just like, yeah, I wonder if he's going to entertain us. Is he going to do something fun? And is there something that he's going to do that is going to meet some need and do something cool that we can enjoy? I mean, it's obvious that they were interested in the miracles and the gifts that he provided, but they didn't seem that interested in Jesus himself. They're focused in what he can give them, but they're not interested in the giver of those gifts. And John calls us, he says, the wedding was the first sign. The passage we're going to look at today is the second sign. And when John uses that word sign, it's language that's important. He's saying there's something spiritual that's happening here. These signs signify God disclosing himself to us. This is God's self-revelation to them so that they would know who God is and what he's like. So these signs were not just cool tricks that Jesus was doing. They were meant to tell them about the God who did these things and the God that they were building their lives upon. And so in the book of John, we saw these two symbols or signs that surfaced with a physical problem that led to a spiritual conversation. The first was the wedding where they turned water into wine. The second is this passage where he is going to take this royal official's son, or royal official who has a sick son, and it's going to lead to this spiritual conversation. Now, this royal official, when you hear that term, we don't really know exactly what that is in America, because we don't do kings, and kings are not, we kicked them out a long time ago. But when you talk about a royal official, he's talking about somebody who worked for the king in that area underneath the Roman rule. And in that, it would have been someone who was a politically powerful person, likely a very wealthy and very influential person, someone who was used to calling the shots, someone who was used to giving orders and having people snap to his attention. And here's the thing, we may not be royal officials, but we are Americans, and we're kind of used to living the same way. Like, we like to call the shots and give orders and see things happen really quickly. Any of you get frustrated when your Wi-Fi lags a little bit? Like, you get refreshed, and if it's not instant, you're like, oh, I was wrong, and you're starting to get upset about something that's happening. You go through drive-thru, and they're like, would you just pull over and wait just a minute for us to bring it? And you're like, oh, come on. It's supposed to be fast food. What do you guys, if you drop the ball? Like, we don't want to wait for fast food. It's like, when I get to the window, it better be there. And if I have to pull up for just a minute, that's way too long. And we're used to getting things met, our needs met, and our desires met immediately. I think that's the way this guy was too. And it's interesting because in this, he begins to make this demand of Jesus. Hey, I hear you're a miracle worker. Come down and help my son. And Jesus immediately puts up a roadblock and doesn't actually meet his need and says something that's a little bit surprising to us. In fact, Jesus makes things very uncomfortable. Now, it's not uncomfortable for Jesus. Jesus is not nervous at all. Jesus doesn't react the way we react to emotion and panic and the feelings in the room. He says something unexpected that doesn't really fit the circumstance that you expect him to say in this moment. He actually offers a challenge to the man that's uncomfortable for this guy who's used to calling the shots. And the man says, help, my son is dying. And what's Jesus say? Hey, you want to have a little chat about some theology? Like, I got a pop quiz for you, a theological pop quiz. Like, it hardly feels like the time to open up a systematic theology text and like do a deep dive into theoretical discussion about the nature of God and the nature of true faith, right? Like, this guy's pouring out his heart. He's desperate. He's panicked. He's worried. And Jesus goes, hey, unless you see signs and wonders, you're not going to believe. And he's actually putting up this kind of a roadblock for him because he wants him to know that he's more than just the miracles he performs. Now, it's interesting, as you look through all the Gospels, as you walk through this, miracles are a normal part of what Jesus does. That everywhere he goes, he's healing people. He's making the lame to dance and the blind to see. He's opening up the ears of the deaf. And he's doing all kinds of supernatural things in order to lead people to faith. But Jesus wants him to know that Jesus is more than just a miracle worker. He's not just there for a miracle. He's actually someone who's far more powerful. He wants them to believe not just in his gifts, but believe in the giver of those gifts. Parents, you ever felt that way at Christmas? Like, you're there and you've worked hard, you've planned for months, and you've gone and purchased and you've wrapped and you've prepared and you've put under the tree and you've done the things, and you get to Christmas and they immediately want to unwrap everything and they want to get the bigger one and the bigger one, and they do the things and they want to go play with the things. And dads, if you're doing your job, at some point you're like, kids, thank your mother. And right? Because you want them to know that it's not just the gifts, but the giver of the gifts that matters in those moments, because this is a relational thing that's happening. And so Jesus is saying, look, I care about the situation, but I care more about you and your relationship with me than I do just about this thing that's right in front of you. But the problem that we have is that we have this inability in our hearts because our hearts are broken, and we have this unwillingness because our hearts are fallen, to simply trust the word of the Lord, to take him at his word and to depend on him. And Jesus is leaning in here, and he puts up this roadblock because he's not going to let this man remain stuck halfway on the road to faith. He says, you're leaning in a little bit, you've got a taste, but there's more for you. I want to give you more. I want to give you not just a good thing, I want to give you myself, which is the greatest thing. that you'll ever know. And so this man is desperate now. Jesus says, unless you see signs and wonders, you're not going to believe. And this man's like, that's not enough. And so now the official said to him, sir, come down before my child dies. And Jesus said to him, go, your son will live. And the man believed the word that Jesus had spoke to him, and he went on his way. The father uses this term. He says, come down before my little boy dies. That word child there means my little boy. It's a term of affection or endearment. It's like, please, just my kid's not going to make it. Would you just come to the rescue? And this little boy, this illness has torn this father's heart up, and Jesus understands the emotions and the relationships, and he acts with compassion. He says, hey, go home. Your kid's going to live. And so he meets that need. But it's for the first time at this point we see real faith on display in the life of this royal official, don't we? You notice what he says. It says the man believed the word that Jesus had spoke to him, and he went on his way. See, faith demands more than just trusting in the power of miracles. Faith demands a walk or an action or a decision to actually trust Christ. And friends, when you begin to think about what faith looks like in your own life, can I just encourage you, as one guy said, don't trust your street smarts when it comes to faith. Don't trust your own natural ability to navigate the lives of spiritual realities and who God is and the life of faith. You need something more foundational and more strong to stand upon and depend upon that. Calvin actually stressed this point in his Institutes, and was reading this week, and read this passage where it said that Calvin talks about how when we're depending on ourselves and relying on our human reason, we're like human beings walking through the wilderness at nighttime. And we're trying to make our way through, but we can't really see. And maybe you get a lightning strike off in the distance in the middle of a storm. You ever been out there where you're out there in total pitch blackness, and all of a sudden the lightning hits and everything lights up for just a minute, and you get just a sense of like the lay of the land and where everything is out there, but then the lightning is gone and it's back to pitch blackness. And you're trying to navigate it with this vague sense and memory of what things are. And Calvin says that's what we are like when we're trying to navigate life on our own, is we've got some sense of what's out there, but we don't really know how to find our way through, and we're trying to navigate ourselves. Friends, don't rely on your own ability. You need something stronger to depend on. Spiritual transformation is an act of grace that God opens our eyes that we can see things that we need to know. We have to take him at his word. And that's what I think that John wants us to understand when he says that this man took Jesus at his word and he left. He actually had to take an act of faith. Friends, this is the crux of the spiritual life. Everything that you do moving yourself towards maturity is going to hinge on this point. Are you going to depend upon the word of God and what he says to guide you moving forward? Or are you going to depend upon self? And Jesus came from heaven and earth so that we might know him and be able to depend upon him. But like he said to this man, remember what he said, this kind of challenge that he made? When this guy said, come heal my son, what did Jesus say? You will not believe unless. And I think my question for us is, what's our unless? What's the thing that you would put in the blank there if you were to say, I will not believe you, I won't trust you, God, unless you bring me a spouse. I won't trust you, God, unless you solve this situation. I won't trust you, God, unless you make my family come back together and resolve this conflict that I'm in. I won't trust you unless you, what is the thing that you would fill in the blank there? Do you have those things in your life that you just keep God at a little bit of an arm's distance, and you're saying, I'll trust you if, and you're negotiating and sort of navigating some things and trying to negotiate your way with the Lord? What Jesus says to this man is, you can't have me that way. You have to take me at my word. And you have to trust me, not just for the gifts, but you have to trust me for who I am. And so he challenges this man to find a bigger faith. This was, for Jesus, a teachable moment surfaced by this problem in the man's life. And this man wanted to have this situation resolved. But it's fascinating because Jesus sends him away and doesn't really, he tells him, he says, go home, go away, go back to your house. Your son will live. Let me ask you a question. Was this son healed at this point? Yes, but did this man know it? No. He had to trust Jesus. He had to leave and go home and take that long journey homeward, not knowing for sure what had happened, but just simply taking Jesus at his word. Can you think about what the wait would have been like for the father? We know this was, I've read a couple different things this week, 25 to 40 kilometers, depending on how you did it, to get home. So this is going to be a long journey. One guy said this road was infamous for being a wearisome road to travel. It was not a quick trip. It was not a fast, fun little journey he was taking. It was a slow, laborious journey home. And the whole time, he's wondering if his kid is alive. Like, imagine the agony as he's wrestling with that moment. I was talking with a friend of mine not long ago, and he was telling me about this situation of panic within the parent circle that they were in. How many of you have Life 360? How many of you don't have Life 360? Let me say it that way. There's a couple of you that don't, but almost all of you, like we want to know where our kids are all the time. We want to be able to pull it up and like, there they are right there. I know where all my children are. And he was saying that there was a situation where his son's Life 360 disappeared and they couldn't find him. And all of a sudden he started getting texts from all the other parents. They're like, hey, my kid, I don't know where he went. Like, I don't know, he's not showing up on Life 360. He's like, me either. And they realized that this whole friend group had disappeared from the face of the earth. And these parents were panicked, and they were all worried. And really, all that happened was they'd gone into a basement to play some video games, and phones couldn't get there. But these parents were panicked, not knowing where their kids were for 24 minutes. Imagine 24 hours of a journey home, not knowing if your son was alive or had passed away in the moment. And yet Jesus said, your son's going to live. He said he took Jesus at his word, and he left and went home. Verse 51 says, as he was going down, his servants met him and told him his son was recovering. So he asked him the hour when he began to get better, and they said, it was yesterday, about the 7th hour, I think the fever left him. And the father knew that was the exact hour when Jesus had said to him, your son will live. And he himself believed, in all his household. Do you see the difference that this situation has made in the man? I love that the man's servants couldn't wait to share the good news with him. Like the kid is home and he's in bed, all of a sudden the fever's gone, and the kid probably gets up and he's like, dude, can I go out and play? You know, he's totally fine and back to normal, and the servants they hightail it, and they want to go and let Jesus know the good news. Your son is alive, he's okay. And so they can't wait, and they quickly rush off to go tell him. But the fascinating thing about this is Jesus is nowhere near this child, is he? So this is the first time it says that the royal official, it says that he himself believed. That there's something in him that goes, this is a miracle that's just taken place. And it's not something that he did through some party trick. This wasn't some power play. This wasn't some magician's thing that happened. But this was a guy who was kilometers away who knew. And in that instant, he spoke, and my son was healed and rescued. There's something powerful happening through this person. It's not just a miracle worker, but he was interested in who this person was and trusted him in a whole new way. I love the way this story unfolds, where it says he himself believed. Think about this scenario, though. This is this is a man who worked for royalty. This is a man who had influence, who was used to calling the shots, who was used to making everything known. And now he's taken the word of an illiterate, itinerant religious man that he's never met before, and he left to go home and to trust this man and trust what he said. Friends, can I just say, Jesus never works up a sweat doing a miracle. Like, you never see Jesus wringing his hands like, I don't know, let me think about whether your kid's going to be okay. He just says to him what? Go home. Your kid's going to be okay. Jesus is never unsure. He's never just doing party tricks that he wants to impress them. He wants them to know they can trust him with their very life. Not just with this situation, but you can trust me with everything. And so he's pushing on this man so that this man's faith might increase. And notice it says that it's not just him who believed in the miracle now, he believed in the miracle worker. He now understands who Jesus is, and he comes to a place of faith. But it's also not just he himself who believes. It says it's also his whole household that believes. Well, how did his household know what happened? Well, he went home and started telling them. You're not going to believe what happened. I went up and I met that guy that everyone talked about, and I asked him to come, and he said, well, I'm not going to come. And he said, you're going to really trust me? You don't trust me unless you see something miraculous happen. And I pushed on him again and said, I begged him to do something for my kid. And he said, go home, he's going to be okay. This man must be divine. He must have access to God that is like someone who's come directly from heaven to earth. And he begins to trust him, and he tells his household all about this. And so this man has now gone from using God to actually being useful to God, to make his power known to others. And it's fascinating to me that suffering is what surfaced this man's need, but also surfaced the opportunity for God to teach him in a whole new way. One man said that we only mature in faith through suffering. That we can begin by understanding and thinking about faith. We can grow by choosing to believe and choosing to do those things, but suffering somehow matures us and deepens our faith like nothing else can. And I think you see that in the life of this man. Jesus, it's fascinating to me the way this whole passage unfolds. Like when you think about what this would be like to be this guy that's in this moment of crisis, about the thing that probably felt like the biggest challenge he'd ever faced in his life, his kid might die. And Jesus pushes on him and doesn't hurry, but makes him uncomfortable and says, I'm going to help you, but I'm not going to do the things the way you expect. I'm not going to do them the way that you want. But if you shift your way of life to me and to trusting me, I will meet you there in that place. And I think that's what we all need to know. That in the challenges of life and the things that we face and the big things that seem so enormous right in front of our lives, I think what Jesus says to us is, I'm not going to do everything the way you want, and I'm not going to do everything the way you expect. But if you trust me, I will meet you in that space, and I will bring about your good. Question for you. This son that was healed, even though he's healed, let me ask you this. Was he ever going to get sick again? Of course. Was the son that had been healed, was he ever going to trip and fall and break an arm or leg? I mean, probably. He's a guy. Like we just find ways to do that stuff. Was this kid ever going to grow up and have a girl break his heart because she treated him wrong? Probably, because most of us go through relationship difficulties in life. Was he ever going to grow up and struggle with his own sin and brokenness in ways that beat him up and that he feels like he's ready to throw in the towel in life because he didn't sure what to do about it? Yes. Like this healing in this one moment was not going to fix everything in the future of this guy's life. He was still going to have other struggles. There were still going to be other challenges. There were going to be times where his father was going to have to trust God's work in this kid's life again and again and again. And what Jesus is saying is, if I fix this one moment in the timeline of your life is going to be a series of moments that I'm going to have to constantly fix, and you're going to have to trust me with all of it. That I'm not going to simply fix this and everything is made right. You're going to have to continue to trust. Jesus was stretching the faith muscle in this man's life, this father's life. Many of you know that my wife and I also almost lost a child. That there was a time where we thought we had a child that had passed away, and we weren't sure what was going to happen. And as that ambulance took my wife and my son away, I was there, and I didn't know. I didn't know if he was going to live or die. And as we're driving to the hospital down that road, I'm literally in my head going, do I call my wife and have her tell me on the phone, or do I wait till I get there to have her tell me if he's alive or not? And I can tell you, there's no agony more difficult on this planet than the idea of losing your child. And we were desperate, and I was praying and begging and asking God to save our kid, and it was as though we received a child back from the dead, and he lived, and we're grateful. And there's like I'm overwhelmed with gratitude for the Lord for doing that. But here's what I want you to know. That didn't mean we didn't ever have to worry about our kid again. Like my boy grew up, and he got a driver's license, and we gave him keys and took a car out into the world. And we're like, oh, man, like speed limits, you start doing all the things. And my kid got long COVID and struggled for 9 months, and we prayed and struggled and watched the ups and downs of life and that. Then we sent him off to college, and he went to college, and a couple years ago went on a hike in the Alps and disappeared from his phone. He got where he was above the line, and we couldn't see him. And for 3 days, in this dangerous hike in the snow where the storm hit, we were like, I'm sure he's okay, right? Like we just weren't sure because we couldn't find him. Do you see the importance of trusting God, not just trusting God in one situation of your life? See, it was not just this one instance for this man, and why Jesus got in front of him, kind of put a roadblock up in front of this man, was because he wanted to know it's not just this one time you need me. You need me in all of life. You need a mature faith that's going to carry you through all the ups and downs. And the point is that God was going to meet him in this moment in a way that seemed like the most important thing. But God also wanted to deepen in him a faith where he himself believed in God. And God would carry him through the rest of his life and into all eternity. And so he wanted to help him grow. So what do we do with this? How do we grow in our faith? I think there's a couple things we can pull from this passage and from this story that help us understand. And first, I want to contrast immature faith and mature faith that we see kind of worked out in this guy's life as he started off at kind of an immature place but moved and progressed to a little bit more maturity. Immature faith brings our distress to God for what he can do and gives demands to God based on our circumstances. See, immature faith comes to the Lord and says, God, you have to fix this. And we only run to the God when we're in distress. It's a Jesus take the wheel moment. Like when we're in those moments and we're not sure what to do, you run to God, but then you forget about him because all you're looking for is rescue out of that crisis moment. So the short thing that you see, but you're not trusting God with the long game of your life. But as we mature in faith, part of what happens is we begin to deepen and move into another place. Not that we no longer take times of distress to God or our circumstances to God, but mature faith begins to depend upon God no matter what. You say, whatever comes my way, I'm going to trust you. And mature faith begins to delight on God, not just for how he can fix our world, but for who he is. So we delight, we have affection, we care for him. We begin to love and to worship and to stand in awe of who he is because of who he is, not just because of what he accomplishes for us. And so I think it's important for us to understand that mature faith, sustaining faith, is this kind of spiritual, deep conviction and commitment to trust God with the long game of our lives. And when you move to a mature faith, you're walking with the Lord for the long haul. And you just know in all the ups and downs and all the twists and turns that God has got our back and he's going to watch over that. And as we see this passage, just as God loves the royal official too much to leave him in a place of just trusting him for that one event, friends, God loves you too much to leave you there. He's going to continue to work to grow your faith and to mature you and move you in a new direction. But Jesus' word alone ought to be enough for us. And that's what I think he wants us to trust. So let me just show you kind of how faith progresses in our lives. Not that it works out this cleanly, but if you think about kind of what are the stages we move through as we begin to grow and mature in terms of our faith. The first is faith progresses. It always begins by attention. It says that he heard the word. He heard about Jesus. And so he sought Jesus out and began to give Jesus his attention. And so faith begins by who is this one and what is it that he is here to do and what is he like, and begins to give Jesus his attention. And that begins this kind of faith journey as he's thinking on what he's heard about who Christ or who God is. Secondly, it grows by decision. So if it begins by attention, it actually grows when we choose and make a choice to invest in that. So you give him your attention, and then you make a decision, which is in the realm of our choices, our will, our desires, and we say, I want to know more. And so this man heard about Jesus and began to give his attention, but then he went and sought Jesus out and entered into a dialogue with Jesus, and he made a decision to trust Jesus when he turned to go home, right? It says he believed him, took him at his word, and went home. That's the third action. It matures by action. That we progress in life, it begins with attention. It grows when we make a choice that I'm going to choose to believe. I'm going to follow him. And third, it matures when we actually take a step of faith. When we have commitment and conviction, and we step out in faith and begin to follow what it is that God says to do. So when Jesus said to him, your son is well, go home, what's it do? It says he took him at his word and he left. So he took a step of faith. He believed, even though he couldn't see yet. He believed what God said and took a step of faith. So you see that progression as you work through that. In verse 49, he heard and believed that Jesus could fix physical problems. So he trusted him for miracles, but he didn't really trust Jesus for himself. But he began to give him his attention. And then as he invested there and began to dialogue with him, he made a choice that he's going to trust this guy. I'm going to choose to believe him even though I can't verify that my son is okay. And then he left and he went home trusting. But here's what's fascinating. When the men, his servants, came to tell him that his son was okay, what is it that the man did? I mean, obviously he rejoiced that his son was okay. He was overjoyed, and I'm sure he was ecstatic that his kid was okay. But you notice what question was right on the tip of his tongue? He goes, what hour did he start getting better? Tell me what, like, he wanted to know something else. Like, when did my kids start getting better? And they said it was the 7th hour. And he knew that was the exact hour when Jesus had spoken to him. He had this kind of pregnant thing in his mind of like, I can't wait. He wanted his faith to grow, and he wanted to see what God had done. And as soon as he knew it, it said he himself believed. It was that action of faith that actually grew and developed him. So friends, here's my question. Will you believe God and take him at his word? Will you do what this man did and accept his word and take it? And maybe make it even more difficult. Will you believe God and take him at his word when it doesn't meet your expectations? Will you yourself believe God and take him at his word when the payoff is much further down the road than you prefer? Will you yourself take God at his word and believe him when it involves trusting something you can't yet see? Will you believe him? Will you take him at his word when you can't see how this helps you in the here and now? But only seems like something out there that's too far away. Will you believe God and take him at his word when the result isn't what you wanted? And I love in the Old Testament, there's a story of this group of guys, his friends that needed God to show up to rescue them. And they're testifying to God's goodness. And they're like, man, we believe that God's going to show up and save us. And they say, but even if he doesn't, we're still going to have faith in him. Friends, that's what mature faith looks like. It's the one who comes to the Lord and says, Lord, I'm asking you to solve this situation, but I'm going to trust you no matter what, because I know in the long game of life that you've got it. Friends, how do you know you can count on Jesus? Y'all know this is kind of his idea, right? I love what Hebrews says. Let us run with endurance the race that's set before us. Let's play the long game. Keep going, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. Some translations call it the author and perfecter of our faith. And the idea is that Jesus is the one who gives faith. He started it. He's the author. He's the founder. He's also the one who grows our faith. He's the perfecter, the developer. He's the architect, and he's the construction worker that oversees the project. He starts it, and he sees it all the way through. Philippians 1 says, he who began a good work in you will continue to perfect it. God's going to continue to grow your faith. He's going to continue to develop it because Jesus doesn't do anything halfway. And so it says, looking to Jesus, keeping your eyes on Jesus. How do you grow in your faith? Don't fixate on your problems. Fixate on him. Look to him. Trust him. I love what Jesus says in Revelation. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. You know what that means? It means, I got this. That's what Jesus is saying. He's like, I got this. Start to finish, I got it. I got your life, whatever it is, from the very beginning to the very end. I've got it all. Friend, God sees around every bend and every hill in your journey. When you don't understand, he's not surprised by a single twist or turn. He sees through the darkness of every valley, and he sees over the mountaintop to what lays ahead. You never drag God into the future. He's always already there, waiting for you, and he knows what lies ahead in your journey, and so you can trust him. And as we mature in our faith, we begin to see the world that God is building and this progression that we grow so we can trust him in the here and the now. Can I give you one more reason why you can trust him? Because this isn't the royal official is not the only father who once worried about his son or saw his son facing death. Our Heavenly Father sent his son into the world in order to die so that we might be redeemed and so that all the wrongs of this world might be righted. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. And as this royal official did not want to lose his son, the Father willingly gave his son so that he might restore us and he might make all things new one day. And it's through his death and his resurrection, his death upon a cross and his resurrection from an empty tomb, that Jesus will make all the wrongs of this world righted one day. So friends, I encourage you, take all the little, they don't feel little to us, but take all your little things that you need righted in the world, take him to him. But don't just look to him for that. Trust him with all the wrongs in the world that will one day be righted, as he will carry you through. Let me pray for us. Father, I pray that you would meet each of us in the space where we are right now. Father, for all the things that people in this room are facing here and now, Father, I pray that they would know that you love them, that you're with them, and that you will meet them in the space, the spaces that they find themselves in. And Father, I pray that through that they would learn to trust you at a deeper level. Father, for each of us, that we would know that you've got everything beginning to end, that there's nothing that surprises you, and we can trust you with all of life. Father, I pray that just as this royal official trusted you and he himself believed, Father, I pray that every one of us would ourselves believe upon Christ and know that you want to bring good into our life and that you will do so. Father, we pray it through the name of Christ. Amen.
Well, you're invited to